Can you say something at the microphone?
I can. So this is the microphone there.
Yep.
Is that okay?
Yep. Good. Thanks, Laura.
Testing, testing, testing.
Yep. Good, Sean.
Testing.
You're talking to
All right. All right.
Great. Thanks.
Testing. Too quiet? Hello.
That's good. Thank you. Can you just check the other mic?
Hello.
Right. Okay. Where do you want to announce stuff from? Where do you want to start?
Where?
Yeah. I mean, you can stood there looking at that camera up there, or you can.
Need a mic.
There's a camera.
I see.
You can go behind the panel and introduce. Then you can introduce the panel because we can't see you. And it's 11 o'clock. Go over there behind the
Stand.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That the far camera is the one that's actually recording your.
Can you see my head?
I can see all of you.
Brilliant.
Better explain again.
So are we ready to start?
We're live. We're going.
Okay. Houston, we are live. Okay. Welcome everyone to Linoprint 3. It's the first Sunday of Linoprint 3, and we're here in the studio, Centrespace Studio in Bristol, and we're here until the 21st of the month. And we're very fortunate today to have some of the exhibiting artists, and there are 30 artists exhibiting, a fantastic range of lino cut and relief printing artists with a huge range of skills. And I have got some of the most skillful here today. Okay, I'm just going to very briefly introduce you to them, and then it will give you a little bit of information about themselves, and then we're going to start the Q&A. When we're doing the Q&A, obviously people can send in questions to Laura's YouTube.
That's right. So if you are online and you want to ask a question, please use the chat function and we'll read out your question. And in the room, Josh has got a microphone on a stick, which he'll endeavour not to poke you with, but he will come and aim it at you so you can ask your question.
Okay. So we have Cat Flint, all the way from the USA, Sean Starwars, all the way from Kubrick, Laura Bioswell, and all the way from just outside Bath, the fantastic Michael Craine, who is founder and boss of Cranfield.
Oh, I'm not founder. No, I'm not old enough for that. I'm third generation.
Oh, no.
Thank you for that.
It's in your blood.
I would be 103 if that was correct.
Looking well.
You are looking very well on it. Okay, so I think we're just going to start with Kat, who's just going to introduce herself and then go through the panel. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Kat. I'm a lino cut printmaker. I come from Aberdeen in the northeast of Scotland, although I'm now based in London. I've been making lino cut prints for about 5 years now, and I love it.
Sean Starwars from Mississippi, back in America, and I just love to carve linoleum and wood, so that's what it is.
Okay, and I'm Laura Boswell, and I've recently moved up to Scotland, and I work in lino and woodblock, and I use the reduction print method.
And I'm Michael Craine. I'm the current managing director of Cranfield and Caligo. My father and my grandfather before me were colourmen. I studied paint and ink chemistry, so please don't ask me any questions about how to do a lovely print of your grandmother. Either you'll be disappointed, but not as much as your grandmother, I suspect. So.
Okay. Right. Do we want to start with a question from the room, maybe? Have we got a question? Yes.
Hi, this is a question for Michael about your Caligo ink.
Yeah.
You might not be able to answer this for me because it might be a bit too difficult for me to understand. I was just wondering, how does safe wash ink work? Because it's oil based,
Yep.
but it washes away with water, like
Yeah.
some sort of magic.
Yeah,
And
fine.
is that a secret that you have
No,
to keep?
it's not secret. No, I'm happy to explain. It's made by Pixies in Dingley Dell. Linseed is a wonderful crop, and we have so many derivatives from linseed. And there are the particularly burley type, which are very, very oily, but there are those that are happy to emulsify, and indeed we use that ability to emulsify to make the ink fall apart with soap and water. If you don't add soap, they're not water miscible, you can't dilute them, but they do need a liquid soap to make it fall apart. Soap itself is a fascinating product. It's actually originally used to be produced from tar itself, but that does need the back of an envelope to do a few diagrams for you. But that's really how it works. That the linseed oils we use are those that are happy to emulsify.
Interesting. Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Just a sort of purely personal question. Are you ever going to bring out Payne's Grey?
That's a very good question. Let's talk later.
Only if I can join in the conversation, because I want it too.
If sufficient of you were to ask for it, then we would do that.
So we want to do an online petition?
You should, yes. Write to your MP. Yeah, that's fine.
You can get people doing it now.
Who wants Payne's Grey?
Yes. Oh dear. Okay. We'll see what can be done. Thank you.
Okay. Have we got another? Have you got any questions on the internet yet? Right. So another one from the room, perhaps. Got another question. Now I know this lady in the front row. You had a question, didn't you?
Yes, this is a question again about Cranfield. Could you explain the difference between safe wash oil, wiping compound, linseed jelly?
Yeah.
Because within our group we're a bit confused and people tend to add extender to everything,
Okay. Yeah.
which isn't the answer.
Yeah. Fine. Very sensible question. An extender, you're simply adding more of the same. So you're adding a colourless ink. So as you do so, the structure of the ink won't change. It'll separate, and the tack will remain just as it starts life. So that's good if you simply want to weaken the colour, but not do anything else. The other end of the spectrum is to add an oil, which is extremely effective. You don't need to add much for the viscosity and the tack to drop markedly. The gel, it has a structure, but you're adding essentially Vaseline. You're adding something that isn't naturally in the ink, and so when you do so, you're wanting to make sure that as the name suggests, that you can, when you wipe a plate, it comes off relatively easily. But you don't want to change the tack too much or the viscosity too much, because if you do, when you wipe it, it'll actually come out of the image area. So that's why, used carefully, the gel reducer would be, or the wiping compound would be the one that is added with the most care, if you like. So the extender is the easiest to add. Oil, a few drops, you're simply diluting the ink, but the gel, you're adding something new, so you do so with care when you want to clean a plate without too much elbow grease.
I've got a question. It's a question for all three printmakers. Okay, so obviously I put the show together, and I've invited you all to be in the show because you are all very successful in what you do in your own way. You're all very different in style, fantastically creative, fantastic different in sort of thinking, sort of drawing, cutting, and application of ink onto all sorts of different types of paper, and the way that you sort of produce your stuff. There's an awful lot of people that are getting into liner cutting now, because it's in essence it's a very sort of simple, approachable process that's great to do, and it's very sort of hands-on in this digital world. People are really liking it. I'll get to the question in a minute. How do you think that all those people that are sort of, amateur printmakers that work in, a bank, that want to be professional printmakers and sell prints for a living, what do you think the magic of success is for you in the way that you approach what you do, the making and the promoting yourself and the selling? Let's start with you, Kat.
This question is quite relevant to me because I am the person who started out as a hobbyist and became a printmaker, and it's happened in the last 5 years. Do
Did you have like an illustration background or training in?
My background is in philosophy and psychology, so I'm not an artist, but I have always, I have always created things alongside whatever else I'm doing, and I've always needed a creative outlet. And it wasn't until I started posting on Instagram that I found a way of channeling that, I suppose. And I think the reason my work has taken off on Instagram is that I tell stories. I think for me that's the essence of it. My work is very story-led. If I'm not making prints, then I'm writing stories, or I'm kind of writing songs. Like it's always been stories for me, and I think Instagram and social media in general is quite a good way of telling those stories. I think just even the story of how you make your work is interesting to people. I find people like coming along on the journey with you.
So you make videos, as it were, of you cutting or sort of...
So I make videos, I mean, from the very start of a print I will capture little bits of the process. I find that quite easy to do as I go along. It's not a huge effort on top of what I'm doing anyway, and I do it for my own benefit anyway, because I like to look back on how things are developing. I'll use that to kind of decide where it goes next. So naturally I capture things as I go and then piece them together into kind of videos or into images that I can put on Instagram. Partly so I can share what I'm doing and to kind of motivate myself, but then also because people like to learn, people like to see how something is developed, they like to ask questions, and I find the more of that progress and development I share, the more people want to be involved, and that's been a really good way to engage with people. I love it. Like, I learn things from other printmakers. I'm very happy for people to ask me questions, and yeah, I'm very happy to tell the story of what I'm doing.
Do you think, because your work is so fantastic, like you say, sort of full of story, it's also full of detail, that the nature of the media that you share, you just do Instagram, don't do other...
Like, I feed my Instagram through to Facebook, but I hate Facebook,
okay,
so I just...
So do you think that it's the nature of your images makes them very Instagrammable because of the detail and the quality? People can see the quality and they want to sort of zoom in and enjoy the sort of your skill of cutting.
That can be a factor. Although actually I find that often the simplest, boldest images that I do are the ones that actually really engage people, because the nature of Instagram, people are scrolling very quickly through large quantities of information, and something has to jump out immediately if people are going to notice it. If people are already engaged with you, then they're interested and they'll look in more detail. But if you're trying to connect with new people, quite often the most bold, direct images are the ones that do it, and actually the detailed pieces are easier to scroll past, I think, because there's an overwhelming amount of information.
So it's important to sort of that people, you understand how to connect with people, really, isn't it? Your audience or your fans or your buyers, I suppose.
I suppose, yeah. I mean, I try not to let that lead what I do too much. I make the work I make, but then I'll try and find a way of presenting it that I think will be attention grabbing.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you very much, Sean. Tell it like it is. Come on.
Well, the first part of your question about people that are wanting to ease into the world of making images, I think this is great. You know, I think relief printmaking, Lino, it's not a big investment of anything. You know, the materials have a minimal cost. And time, not a major investment necessarily either. Some people spend a lot of time making work. Understandably, they might be a little more trepidatious about just...
And you can pause what you do, can't you? You can put it to the side, the cuts, the
you kind of get a little feel for where things are. I love the idea that you can print something and go back and continue to work. But for the way that I work, which is not a big time investment, it kind of takes the pressure off of something having to be good. And when you're first starting out, you can expect that maybe your work's not going to be as solid as it will eventually be. And the idea that you can make something and have it to look back at is very encouraging. Okay. You know, it just, that's the empowering part, is that you make something, you're like, wow, I just made that. Okay, well, it's not exactly what I wanted, but man, that's pretty close. And so I'm going back for more. I can maybe rework into this, or I'm just going to start a brand new piece, because you can get a lot done in an hour, or you can get a lot done in a day, or, you know, or in 3 months too. But, you know, a little bit of time gives you a great big payoff. And I think that's one of the things that appeals to people that are curious about relief, because it is so instantaneous.
And you have, you all have huge amounts of Instagram followers, I know, but always all of you making sort of videos as well as sort of flat, sort of images. You said something very interesting to me yesterday about your sort of connecting to your audience, and because you talked about Instagram, then you also talked about now TikTok. Yet another thing to learn about. So just tell us a little bit more about that.
Well,
connecting with your followers.
Sure. I feel like you don't really have a sense of who's paying attention to what you're doing until really when you do a live video. It's so. This is a great turnout. This is such an encouraging turnout, and I exhibit my work pretty frequently, but you don't always get anywhere near the turnout that we had last night or that we have right now. And in a lot of ways, that's kind of dispiriting. It's like we did all this work, we put it up, we're showing it, and then almost nobody really came to look at it. And then when you do a live and you have people that are popping in, they may not stay the whole time, but they're popping in from South America or South Africa or Japan or England, and and you're just in this little town in Mississippi, or you're in a small town in England, and there's people coming at you from everywhere
with hundreds of thousands of people potentially, aren't you? Instantly, without having to stand in a tumbleweed gallery.
Right, and so it really just encourages you to do more of that. And it's nice when you have people that are return viewers, and you start to really feel like you're building your own community. And for me, I feel like the community part is a little bit more solid on TikTok than it is on Instagram. But and the way I always think of it, and maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like people get onto TikTok to see what other people are doing, and people go onto Instagram to show you what they're doing. And so I'm showing what I'm doing in both cases, but I feel like the audience is more receptive on TikTok. Similar to YouTube, where they want to see what's going on. There's some opportunities to learn and to expand what you're doing.
Isn't TikTok full 17-year-olds that, in my experience, are not massive print buyers?
Oh, there's a lot of 17-year-old printmakers out there. But that was a weird part of it. Was it did really feel like it was a much younger audience, and it also didn't feel like it was super serious in printmaking. And I felt like, well, for my part, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to stake a little. I'm not a very. I'm serious about what I do. It's every day, but I'm not serious when I'm doing it. But I want to get out there and stake a claim for what it is that I'm doing, and I'm not going to let it go to all the teenagers that are. It's like I'm going to take a little bit of that.
It's good. Yeah, that's brilliant. And just very briefly, are you still committed to making a print a week for life?
Yep.
Brilliant.
Yep. As long as I'm still kicking.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Laura.
Okay. I think for me, it's all about communicating. I absolutely adore the whole nerdy part of printmaking. The whole papers, inks. What can I do with this? How can I make this work? What if I wanted to do something that's... a lot of my work is reduction print, and it's about just making pictures that say outdoors, that say wet, sunny, dry, windy. And so working out how to do that in Lino, which is basically binary, you cut it and it's not there, you leave it and it is there, is quite a challenge. And I've always loved sharing that with people. And I think I've always been very upfront about how I do things and why I do things. And they don't always go right, and they do, and I have, I still trash editions, I still get it wrong, but I've always shared all that, and I think because I've kind of been very open, and I've always tried to be helpful with people when they've asked questions, and I've taught a lot. you do build up a following because people know that they'll find out stuff, basically.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, one of the things that we did during lockdown was to commit to, we started off doing a YouTube film a day, it was a 5 minutes with the phone. I mean, Ben, my husband, heroically learnt about film editing and sound. And we started just inviting people into the studio because we figured that there would be people who'd like that. And then we used to do Friday night print parties where for an hour anybody could tune in on YouTube and join us in the studio, and they were always really anarchic. I kind of had a plan.
Does that bump up your followers? Because that's what we're obsessed with.
Yes, it did. And I think also the other thing I would say is that I attend to social media. I check what people are saying. I try to get back to them if I can. And
you're very connected with your followers and your sort of fans, as it were, because you're very good at sort of communicating with them on a sort of personal level.
I try to do that, and I try to always share things that I find out about that are interesting, and that helps to build the followers. But also, I don't mind making a fool of myself, which is always quite promising.
Yeah, that's good. You've just got to be sort of in front of people, really.
Yeah, you
brilliant.
do.
Thank you very much.
Well, I will just comment one thing, that printmakers, you're an incredibly sociable lot, and Cranfield makes artist paints too. And very rarely do we have painters that want to come to the factory. We regularly have printmakers. You're very welcome. Anybody, we have an open door policy. Make an appointment through our website. And printmakers come in their droves. They love meeting together. Some printmakers never actually get round to making the print because they're asking you if you damp the paper and what kind of roller you use. It's always the details got to be right. But you share ideas. And I think that's a fantastic thing. Painters are in the moment. They're living for that millisecond when the paint leaves the brush onto the canvas. But printmakers find the whole process of printmaking inspirational. I think that's a great thing about. So well done, all three of you.
Thank you.
Okay, so from the way.
There's quite a number of people on live watching, and they have some questions. So the first one, with immediate interest in linseed oil spontaneously combusting when drying, how do you your printmaking inks affect, and what are your advice to avoid this?
Okay, it's not really a problem for the average studio. The risk is with linseed itself. It's a vegetable, and so when you cut grass and it begins to oxidize and age, it creates heat. The same is true for linseed. Of course, when you're using it, it's already got some ballast in it as pigment. However, it's sensible that you take some precaution. You'll know a candle doesn't light, the whole thing sort of remains intact. It's only the fact you've got a little wick, a bit of string at the top, and the combustible material, the paraffin wax, goes up that string. And of course, the difference between the string and the candle is air. And so if you have linseed oil alone in a rag, and it's crunched up and left on the side and perhaps in sunlight, you've got the aging process of the linseed oil. You've also got masses of air. It's why perfectly harmless things like flour will explode, and ships have gone down because coke dust in the hold has ignited. So we just take common sense that you don't leave something which has the potential to catch fire naturally in something like a rag where an awful lot of oxygen can get to it. But really, realistically, in my many years in the industry, I've only ever known it happen once through carelessness. It wasn't at our place, but another factory did catch fire, but it was at a manufacturer who was using vast quantities carelessly of linseed in rags. Does that answer the question? Don't lose sleep.
Question for the printmakers. How do you take your audience into consideration when creating a piece?
Oh, well, if I start with that one, I don't. No, I do. No, what I think is, I know if I'm passionately excited by the picture that I am making, that's what the audience wants. I have to really, really want to make that print. And there's some magic alchemy about being excited and pushing yourself to achieve that will attract the audience, I've found. So go with what you're really passionate about. That would be my advice.
Yeah, I would second that. I think if you're enthusiastic about something, it shows. And I think, rather than trying to guess what people want, you have to make what you're making. You have to make what is true for you, and there will always be people who will connect with that. And I think, yeah, rather than trying to chase trends or chase an audience, you have to just make something that is. I mean, I hate the word authenticity because it's bandied about too much now. But you do have to be authentic. You have to say something that is meaningful to you, and people will find meaning in that.
Usual.
I think you're surprised by what people connect with when they're looking at your work. It's not always the thing that you think this is what it's all about. And that's another, I use the word empowering a lot because there's so much that's empowering in printmaking, but that's another thing that's just really empowering, is that even the work that you don't feel 100% about, it might have that same strong personal connection for somebody else, and it's this nebulous thing that you didn't really predict. And so I feel like it's good just to make stuff and to put it out there, even the things that you don't feel as strongly about, and then just react to whatever happens from there. But then also, it's fun to do things that you know that you're joining a community. You know, like, I wasn't a kid that grew up loving monsters. You know, I draw a lot of monsters and stuff now, but I've only, in the last 10 or 15 years where I've really gotten kind of into those things. And then you connect with people that they loved it for the last 60 years or the last 15 years, but they're only 20 or whatever. And so sometimes it's nice to do things knowing that you are a part of something instead of the other way around.
Okay, reduction lino cut. How do you manage paper to prevent changes in paper humidity and problems with registration?
That's tricky. You're looking at me. God, no pressure there. Well, when it comes to reduction lino, I print with dry paper. And I am very lucky in that I live in a part of the world where there aren't like massive swings in humidity. And so it's all, yeah, basically where I live now, it's just always damp. So my paper, when I'm working on it, it doesn't change a lot in size or anything like that, so it's not such a problem for me. When I have used damp paper for doing Japanese woodblock, so I do have experience of working with damp paper, what I do is I keep it in a damp pack. Films on YouTube if you want to see that. But if I have to stop work and keep it at the same size, I put it in the freezer. And hope that nobody puts ice cream on top of it.
That's a great
So yeah, you can put it in the freezer, and it takes about 15 minutes to get a paper pack to just defrost, and then it's good to go again. So that's my top tip for that.
All right.
Question for each of the artists. What do you think the material of lino, wood and the relief process brings to your work, and do you use any other process to create work?
You go first.
I like anything that I can carve into.
You use a wood a lot of the time, don't you?
I do. I use wood a lot.
But is it like a plywood or?
Usually birch, Baltic birch, plywood, or Sheena plywood.
Yeah.
Even MDF, which I guess is a material they call it the same thing over here.
Yeah.
No, it's bandons. Maybe they have like some special kind that comes out of California, but they're kind of restrictive about everything. Yeah. So, but anything that you could carve into, I enjoy that process of fighting the material. And if your tools are sharp, you're not fighting that hard. But I enjoy that battle, and that's really where everything happens for me. So that's it.
So for me, I've dabbled a little bit in etching. I've done a little bit of screen printing, but didn't connect with them in the same way. In the same way that I've connected with Lino in particular. I find the restrictions of it quite helpful. Like, you've always got a block of a certain size. I quite like printing on awkwardly shaped blocks sometimes. I like trying to fit an image into an awkward space. I find that a helpful restriction when it comes to composition, rather than a kind of a blank page where you can do anything. Like, you are immediately confined. And for me, the process of carving, I think, beefs up my drawings in a really helpful way. So I've always drawn a bit, but never liked what I've drawn. It's never had any particular excitement for me. But for some reason, transferring that drawing onto a block and then carving it, it just gives it this solidity that it doesn't have as a drawing. Because you're restricted in how thin you can go, although my game with myself is to go smaller and smaller. But it has this kind of natural limitation, so you're forced to be chunkier, you're forced to be bolder, and I find that adds a dimension to my drawings that isn't there otherwise, which is why I love it.
Did you produce a little print of the size of a Lego man's head recently, something like that?
The smallest one I've done is 2mm by 2mm. It was a very, very, very tiny head, but I just about managed like 2 little tiny dots for eyes and like the outline of the head. But no, I challenge myself and play little games with myself where I go smaller and smaller and smaller just as practice. So yeah, I started off at a centimetre and ended up at kind of 2mm.
I think I totally agree with you. I find that although I love to draw, there's something edgier about it once it's cut.
Yeah.
It gives it a bit more gravitas somehow, and I love that about lino. But also, I approach making reduction linos in a sort of painter way, in that I don't have a great plan for the outcome of my image. I have a drawing and then I let it go. But I like that binary system and the fact that I'm working in layers and building up the image. I would be a rotten painter because I wouldn't know where to start or where to finish. I like the discipline of the fact that you go with what you've done. You can't go back and paint over it and change it. I think your decision once made is there, and then you must move forward. So I love that, and I think my mind just works in a kind of cutty, printy way. Yeah. It's not. So yeah, that's cutty, printy mind. Yes.
Another question for each of the artists: was there a particular artist that first inspired you to learn printmaking?
Good.
I'll go. Yeah. So for me, because I was skateboarding before I was drawing, but as I got more involved in skateboarding and really responding to all of the creativity that's a part of skateboarding, there were a number of early skateboarders that were the first guys to do their own skateboard graphics, and Neil Blender is one of them. And Chris Miller is another from that same time period that rode for the same company that were the first guys to do their own graphics. But Chris Miller actually did woodcuts for his board graphics and lino cuts. And so when I was reading about that and discovered that these graphics that I was so enamored of were originating as lino cuts, before the internet, there was no way to find out what that meant, And so it was a few years before I was in school and learned in printmaking. You made lino cuts, and once I made that first one, I was like, this is exactly what I wanted to see.
It's just so kind of like, I can just do that now. I can do this now, and it's done. Right. And there it is. And it's just without
without that building up.
I guess with you, there's a lot more about immediacy, because very differently, but Kat and Laura have the ability to spend a huge amount of time and effort on being very precise, which is brutally skillful, but you're much better than me, but being much more kind of immediate and just sort of getting on with it without the sort of the worry of sort of potentially kind of making mistakes, which is, there's different ways, different approaches, but that's sort of, you sort of go, wow, that's it now, I can sort of just get on with it.
Yeah, I always figure I'm coming back to do more, so it doesn't matter. If I totally mess up, I can always take it out in the field and shoot it. Yeah. But usually, it's just it's not that bad, and so just put it out there. Yeah. Because like you're making more the next day.
I don't look at it again. Is there another question?
What there was?
Oh, you're still the inspiring.
The print.
Sorry.
So I wouldn't say there was a specific printmaker that inspired me to be a printmaker. I did a little bit of it at school, so I was familiar with the process. I look at quite a lot of kind of medieval art, kind of engravings, all that kind of stuff, and I've always loved that style, so that was probably what appealed to me about it rather than a specific artist.
Yeah, I mean, I can follow on from that in sort of saying that the things that I tend to gravitate towards, I love the drawings that ceramicists make and sculptors make, because they're describing a three-dimensional thing, but they're drawing with a purpose. They're drawing to use that as a tool to go on and make something else, which is basically what I'm doing as well. So I love drawings like that. I mean, Henry Moore is a really good example of that. I particularly love his drawings. So I guess I find that quite inspiring. So drawings that deal with how do I take this image and create a tool to move on to make something else. I think which is a bit of a sort of weird answer, but that I find really, really inspiring. Yeah. Do we have any in the audience before we go on to internet? So only the internet are asking questions. Oh no, we do have one.
Yeah, I follow a couple of other people, how dare I, who have had issues with like their stuff being copied by other people and all that sort of stuff. Have you had issues with that? Does it concern you?
Cool, who wants to go?
Do you find any of your work being produced on eBay and on T-shirts in America?
I like to do all the copying.
People infringe on you.
I know, I mean, so I have experienced it personally, yeah, my work has been copied. And I think most of the printmakers that I chat to online have experienced it in some way. It's definitely a thing that happens.
Do you mean actually printmakers copying your style and then trying to sell it, or do you mean actually just taking your images and then putting, as you said, I've had that a couple of times.
Both, yeah.
In America, they sort of, it's not just America, it's definitely America, and then selling it as their kind of own artwork, and they put it onto Redbubble, things like that.
Yeah, that definitely happens. Yeah, both have happened. I've had people print off my images from the internet, kind of transfer them onto a block, carve the block. I had someone do that who was teaching Lino cut workshops and was using my images to publicise their workshops.
Did you sue?
Sorry?
Did you sue?
No. I had stern words. It was a very small scale thing, but it's very hard to know how to respond to it. It's a funny thing because the printmaking community is so open. You expect a degree of it, and to be honest, a degree of it is not a problem. I think there are lots of people who are doing it to learn, and I don't have issue with that. It's when people are taking your images and then commercialising them in a different way and using that to shortcut their own creative processes. That's when I take issue with it. But it's very difficult. I find it very difficult to talk about it publicly because I think printmaking is a very positive space, and I love that about it. And you don't want to be the negative voice that's kind of showering stress upon other people, because I think then that kind of shuts down some of the openness and people become wary. And I would much rather it was an open, chatty space where people can kind of share advice and not worry about that. But as I say, I haven't figured out how to respond to it. I think things like suing feels very drastic and also expensive.
And timely as well.
And it would cause a whole load of stress for everybody. And usually it's small scale enough that you can quietly. I find a couple of times I've just directly, quietly approached the person and resolved it kind of behind the scenes. But
I know your children go to school.
I have to say I haven't encountered it in the way you have, but I do get approached. I mean, I've had people come up and say, "Oh, that print of yours, our art group did that last week," which, and my heart always plummets when that happens, because while I absolutely adore sharing technique and I will tell you absolutely how I do things, it kind of breaks my heart that people don't want to do their own thing. And also it's damn difficult to get a print that's working, you know. And if you come up with the goods and you've got that kind of composition and it's the magic is there, you don't really want the whole art group to be doing that. So I think my feeling is more, from my point of view, it's not a financial problem or anything like that, but I just wish people had more faith in themselves, because I teach all sorts of people, and I teach people who have never printed. I've taught people who've never even wanted to print. They've been given the course as a gift, and they all a couple of times. But they all bring, whatever their level, something to the process. I always learn from everybody when I teach, and I just wish people had more faith that they can come up with the goods too. So that's kind of.
I've got an interesting sort of tilt on that. I produced a liner cut of Shane Gowan, who's the lead singer from the band The Pogues. I don't actually know him personally, but I know somebody who knows him very well. And I produced the print and I showed it to him. He liked it, and I sent him a copy, and he was pleased with it. So I sort of 3 or 4 years later, I then sort of decided to put that on a T-shirt. But then I went through Redbubble because I thought, well, let's see what it's like. And I used it, but I don't use it at all now. And when I put it on, I asked him personally for permission to use the image of his face. And then Redbubble contacted me about a week later, and they've taken it down because of the copyright issue. And I said, well, he's personally given me permission to use his face. And they said, well, he doesn't own his face. The copyright people in America, sorry. Excuse me. No, the copyright people, because they're kind of American-based Redbubble. Anyway, so they said I couldn't use it, although he'd given me permission personally to use the image. So I just shrugged my shoulders and did something else. Yeah.
How are we doing? We've got another.
Is that available?
Back to online. This one's for Sean. What do you use to add colour to your prints?
Ink.
Can I just grab one so you can see what they're talking about?
So I use, I like anything in terms of pre-existing color as well, obviously, as ink. So, I mean, that's why I have a lot of these colored papers, this cheap colored paper I like, because the colors are so pretty. I don't mind printing on printed fabric, just anything. But then if we're thanks.
As you can see, there's not much colour on there.
Yeah. So if so I do multi-block printing most of the time, and one of the things I like about that is I can go back in and I can change the colors all around and get a somewhat different image. So color's super important to me. I always say that I like to go to the grocery store and go to like the most artificial section of the store where like the laundry detergents are and the bright colors, instead of the earth tones and everything, because I just really like just that really bright, intense, especially artificial colors like the fluorescent colors, and so that's it.
Can I ask a question from the written questions? We asked social media. And it's, let me see. Yeah, it was about paper, because I know this comes up a lot and people ask, what paper do you use, and does it have to be printmaking paper? So, and I think that's a question for you as well.
Okay, yes. Who wants to start?
I get the best results from printmaking paper, but what constitutes printmaking paper is quite a wide range. So I use kind of cotton rag paper, I use a lot of Japanese papers, kind of quite densely woven fibres. You want something that is kind of relatively light but strong enough that it can take a bit of rough handling. If you're kind of working on a heavy duty etching press, obviously you can go much thicker with your papers, but if you're printing by hand, then you need the thinner papers. I find the specialist printmaking papers I get the best results, but you could probably do it on a bit of A4 copier paper if that's what you've got to hand. Like, it depends what you're aiming to do with it at the end, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing what a nice print you can get on newsprint.
Yeah.
Frustrating a lot of times, but there's so many parts to printmaking. There's so many things that you can really just absorb and just really grasp and embrace, and paper is such a significant part of this whole relationship. And there's a lot to love about paper, but at the same time, there's a lot to know about paper. And I'm not like really hungry to learn as much as I am to make more stuff. And so a lot of times, instead of spending time learning more about paper and getting good reproducible results, consistent results, a lot of times I shoot myself in the foot by not paying attention to those things. So sometimes I do use a lesser quality paper than maybe I should have, or different things that can really sabotage you, but all in the interest of just staying active.
Yeah,
So.
a week for life.
All right, there you go.
Yeah. I mean, I would second the about printmaking paper giving the best result. And also it depends how much sort of pressure you're going to put on that paper. If you are hand burnishing, I always say to people Japanese papers are excellent because Japanese printmaking papers are produced with Japanese printmaking in mind, and that's a press-free technique anyway, where you're rubbing the back and putting many layers down. So the paper is really good at staying fresh through that hand process. But you know, I would always say to people, liner cut's probably of printing methods the most accommodating to, oh, I've got this piece of paper in the drawer and I'm going to use it. And it depends whether you're going to sell at the end or not, because if you're going to sell work, then you have to think a little bit about, you want the paper to have lasting quality and you don't want it to go all yellow and crumbly within a few months. Well, unless you want it to fall apart. Yeah, if you want ephemeral effects.
Yeah, is already old and distressed and would like it to look even older.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I think if people know that's what they're getting, then that's fair enough.
absolutely.
Otherwise, I would say that. And and I try and experiment with papers as well, because your tastes change and your needs change. So I like to have like a stock paper that I work with, but then I have loads of different papers that I play with as well. And I always, with papers, and I don't know about you guys, I like to run tests. I get quite nerdy about testing papers.
Good sample packs from all of the art shops. Like it's worth, if you're unsure about papers, like the Awagami factory do a really good sample pack. I think you can get like the Somerset papers. You can get like just examples of a whole range of papers, and then
do tests.
Yeah, do tests, like do a small block, cut it into pieces, like run it through, see how.
Do you guys buy all your papers sort of online, or do you just sort of try to use local art shops? Or?
I used to live right opposite the John Purcell paper warehouse, which is like the mecca of paper. It's amazing. It's just on this kind of random estate in Brixton, and you go through the doors and it's just paper floor to ceiling, and it's like a kind of labyrinth, and it's brilliant. And it's like with forklift trucks kind of moving all about, and then they've got a little office in the attic where you can go and like look at all the papers. So I buy a lot of my paper through them. Because why would I go
anywhere? You build a relationship with your inks and your paper and your cutters and all the other different elements, don't you, over time?
Can we ask Michael, because Michael knows a lot about paper?
Well, there's a bell curve, if you like, of what's acceptable and what's really going to be good for both the longevity of the print and indeed the speed of drying. We're in a time of transition in paper at the moment, because laudably we're using more recycled content in commercial photocopier for the office. The problem is that for you as a printmaker, and I would agree, if you can afford it, use a printmaking paper, because recycled paper is not the printmaker's friend, because the fibre length gets shorter and shorter with every recycling. And inks need this beautiful stuff, the linseed, to travel down the tube, the paper fibre. They're called the lumen, the hole in the middle of each fibre. And if there's no lumen there, or there's no fibre length there, the oil has nowhere to go, and therefore the drying is retarded. Now, I mentioned this bell curve. Papers that are going to cause you trouble are both those which are not absorbent at all. That's going to be like printing on glass, if you like. It may form a crust, but it will never really oxidize inside. And often the very unabsorbent papers have got an awful lot of china clay. Large parts of Devon appear in most photocopier paper, and china clay is not absorbent to ink. So that's the one end you want to avoid. And again, the other end, the very absorbent papers, they're not good news either for the inks. It's almost like printing on blotting paper. And the ink disappears like a brick down into the paper, and again you get this crust forming. This, in a sense, it's the crust that's going to cause you difficulties. You know, in the tin of gloss at the back of the garage, once that skin has formed, it keeps that gloss alive for years. And if the ink has sunk down into a very absorbent paper, it forms this crust, but then it's very, very slow drying. And the risk for you is that the oil will continue travelling very slowly and it'll appear on the back of the print. And that's not a pleasing look. In terms of the yellowing of paper, that tends to be, we mentioned newsprint. For paper which is going to be here today, chip paper tomorrow and then gone, the paper makers do not want to invest an awful lot in taking out all what is called the mechanical content. And that's things like the bark and squirrels and anything else which was in the forest at the time when the trees were taken down. Yeah. It all gets put in there, which is fine if the paper is going to be used and destroyed, but those cheaper papers are often very acidic. And that too will not only retard the drying, the lignin, the glue, which holds the tree together, goes yellow. That's why if you leave a copy of a newspaper in the back window of your car on a very hot day, for several days you come back and it's gone yellow. It's the tree glue which is going yellow. So my suggestion is don't let these things just be yet another frustration when you're printmaking. Go for good paper, as you've suggested.
What do you spend on a piece of paper then? Because you spend huge amounts on one piece of paper.
Have a good relationship with your paper supplier is a good answer. I tend to buy in bulk, so I have like the paper I use and I'll buy 250 sheets at a time, which makes it's expensive, it's a hit, but I save for that, I budget for that, and I buy it in bulk. And I was lucky enough to do a show with R.K. Burt, who are the wholesalers, and they set me up an account because I was in the office. So a sort of back door.
It's very interesting that these days, we used to have, where I lived down in Whitstable, we used to have a fantastic local art supply, a huge shop with lots of different types of paper. It's interesting what Kat was saying. When you're going in, you look at bits of paper online, they look like bits of white or bits of off-white, and you've got no idea what they're like until they turn up and you go, oh, it's nothing like what I wanted. So, but when you're going into an actual shop or a factory or a place that sells it, you can feel all the different sort of aspects of the paper, and that's when you kind of know that this is what you want. It doesn't matter how thick, what the grammage of the paper, it's just the feel of it and the understanding of how it kind of works, or the sheen of it, or the sort of roughness of it that sort of suits. And it's not until you actually have it in your hands that you know what it's really going to be like.
And that relationship as well. If you can build a relationship with a supplier as a printmaker, it's really, really handy, because then you can go in and you can try things and they might suggest things and get in touch and stuff like that. So I've always found, whether it's tools or inks or paper, it's worth going to see. I mean, I've been to see Michael and it's fantastic. But yeah, if you can have a good relationship with a supplier, that really helps.
All the printmakers out there to be emailing paper manufacturers next week and going to visit them.
take the time to go to the printmaking shop if you can, rather than just anonymous online. It's good to, or at least ring them up and chat to them. I know that
online suppliers, and we're very fortunate to have representatives from Hand Printed here last night at the show, at the PV for the show. Brilliant, and because you can get anything you want, but there's definitely something to be said to having the paper and whatever in your hands, so you can know what you're getting.
Yeah, I think that's where the sample packs come in. If you can't make it to a specialist art shop, then most of Hand Printed definitely do a selection of really good sample packs that you can get.
They're actually, I don't want to big up Hand Printed, but they are great. But they do these very sort of cheap printed papers that if you're doing workshops and things, don't like a sort of A4 and A3 sort of a book that's really cheap and effective if you're sort of starting out. Anyway, sorry.
So, I have a question.
Just a little question that relates to this. Thank you to this expertise advice. I've just come late from South Wales. I had to come and see you guys. I teach international students. We've been doing printmaking every year since January. We're really passionate about it as a medium. We're having to dig deep and keep it quite real at the moment. We've been tearing apart filing card from the old students' files in their basement. We've been using the old ordnance survey maps from the geography department. We've just been using anything that is remotely like paper. We've been getting some fantastic results, but I love the expertise advice, because I'm not going to promise that it's going to look the same in a few years, but whilst they're here for those 2 years, they can be proud of experimenting. So it's lovely to hear that you experiment as well. We keep it quite punk, we keep it real. We sort of having to deal with 20% budget cuts, lots of staff. We're just being as resourceful as we can. So it's lovely to hear expertise advice. Thanks.
If you want to become a paper expert yourself, it's very easy. Buy yourself online a little microscope. They're about 15 quid, and you plug them into your computer. I know you when you come to the factory, we've shown you. And you can play around with paper. You can find out which way the grain direction is if it's a machine-made paper. You can rip up paper and have a look at yourself and see the fibre lengths and an understanding of paper. And as you rightly say, you may, for plenty of good reasons, use something cheaper because the print is for now. But an understanding of when the ideal plate comes along, you're going to use a good sheet for that, then you'll understand what a good paper looks like.
You've talked a lot about paper, but what about the ink?
What about the ink? Yes, very good point.
Because,
Tell us about the ink.
because the ink fades.
Yes.
I mean, I'm sitting here looking at a very pretty picture, but it's on pink. And I've got things which are pink, but they're not anymore, they're white. How do you cope with, how does everybody cope with the fact that colours fade? I mean, the colours that you use, the papers that you use, those colours, they fade. What do you do about it?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. So I can't really talk on behalf of the ink industry in general, but I'll give some general words on this. Really, one would avoid commercial printing inks, anything which is for the commercial market, because the newspaper's needed tomorrow and then it's thrown away. So if you look at a poster, after a while the blue and the black are still there and the magenta and the yellow have faded. So ideally, the ink maker will be using light fast pigments for something which is archival, but those pigments are going to be happiest when they're together. And so when you extend colours, as you'd say, if you make a pink, what you're physically doing is you're making every pigment particle stand on its own. And then there are two things that may make it fade. The first is UV, and one can do something about that. The second is the paper itself. Acidic conditions will make pigments fade as well. But I think one has to be aware that it is a fact of life. Certain pigments will go on forever. So earth pigments, for example, extremely light fast. Others are less so. Information, any good ink maker will be telling you the blue wool scale. That's a 20-minute talk in itself, which I'll avoid for now. So we endeavour to give information to the printmaker, but it is true, especially when inks are heavily extended, they are compromised, and certain pigments will fade with time.
Can I just very quickly, when you say they fade over time, are you talking about 3 months or 30 years, or sort of how long?
Well, my experience, mostly these ones are 30 years.
Oh, okay. Well, they all change over the years, unfortunately.
They were before the days when I could organise my helpful son to frame them with UV glass, because nobody had thought about things like that. So a lot of them were done days before people were even beginning to think about acid-free paper.
Right,
but I've got things which have faded, and that's depressing.
I'm sure it is, but maybe they're not quite as accomplished as some modern inks are. Maybe I don't know.
Well, actually, on that point, I think as printmakers, I would always advise customers. I get this question quite a lot with my work, and I would always say to them, well, don't hang it in your conservatory with the sun coming through onto it. And we do tend to, my husband does my framing and we use a UV glass, and we always use acid-free everything. But I think as a printmaker, you can always advise people that it's not a good idea to put it in full sunlight. I don't know if do you find that?
I tell them put it out in the sun, fades, and buy another one.
Yeah, that's an even better answer. That's an even better answer.
I think we've got a question from the room.
Yeah, I was going to say, you hear a lot about obviously UV glass and archival paper. Is there such a thing as archival ink, or would it be too cost prohibitive?
It would be a very small colour selection.
Yeah.
So it's down to pigments. It's the light fastness is purely the function of the pigment. Yeah, so that's the problem.
What is it about pink?
Oh, well, it's not so much about, because there will be light fast pinks made from light fast reds, but the pink you have in mind, I would imagine, has been made with a red pigment which is not particularly light fast, and 30 years for a pink is pretty good. Strange enough, I thought you were going to tell me of another phenomena, which is one of transient chromophores, when people print and they put something in dark conditions, and then the pink or whatever you printed goes a grubby yellow or a brown, and it's the yellowing hasn't come from the paper, it's come from the invisible content of the ink. Strangely enough, transient chromophore, as the name suggests, chromophores. Chromophore simply tells us it's the shape of a particle which gives us the colour. The transient bit means that they will go if they're put, like old TB patients in years gone by, pushed out into the sunshine. And this happens a lot with painters when they prime several canvases with white and they lean them against the wall, or they put them under the stairs and they take them out a year later or 6 months when they're ready to paint, and lo and behold, they've got this unpleasant yellow cast, and they phone up and we say, put them in the sunshine and it will disappear. And it does. So the world of discoloration, fading, there are all sorts of things that go on, and some pigments don't actually get lighter with time, they go grubbier, they go darker. So pigments do all sorts of things, but it's down to the fault line in that particular pigment rather than something which we could say is pan inks.
Damn you, transient chromophores.
Yeah, you're right. Could you do me a t-shirt with it on? Yeah, down with transient chromophores.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know how we're doing for time.
12 o'clock, so half an hour.
Yeah.
We should go with Lisa's, because Lisa is one of the exhibitors.
Yeah, Lisa exhibited here. She's asking, as artists with substantial Instagram followings, can likes sometimes confuse or misdirect your creative journeys? And if so, how do you make sure to stay true to your work?
And likes.
Likes.
Yeah,
Like
so I think
chasing.
so, like, that's what I so Instagram likes.
You've never had any, Ben?
No. No likes and dislikes. I'm wrong with likes as well. Okay, so.
It's very easy to get caught up, I think, in caring about whether an image gets a good response or not, and you have to mentally shield against it. I try not to care, and I try to not let it dictate what I do, although I notice it in subtle ways that I'm not even aware of until I look back and I go, oh god, everything I've made in the last year is square. Like, and it's
what, for Instagram?
Not consciously for Instagram, but my brain is going, that'll look very nice in a little square. And it's not a strategic, conscious thing that I'm aware of doing, but every now and again, if I take a step back, I go, oh God, I've done it again. And so I try to kind of take stock of it every now and again, like take a step back, look at it and go, okay, I'm doing things I didn't intend to do. I also take a step back from Instagram completely on quite a regular basis. I go through periods of posting quite regularly, and then I'll take 3 months off and go and make some new stuff, and quite often I'll record bits as I'm doing it, but I'm trying not to look at anything other than what I'm making at that point, because I am aware of the effects it can have. And I think it can be really disheartening if you're trying to chase popularity and it's not coming. That can be really disheartening, and so I think you have to just step aside from it and make the work you're going to make regardless of the response it gets, because it can really affect your confidence otherwise, and that would be a real shame, because the algorithms of Instagram are a mysterious beast. You cannot control them. Just because something isn't being seen doesn't mean it's not good, and I think it's really important to remember that. Like, there's so much beautiful work that just doesn't get seen, and it's not because it's not worth seeing, it's just because a kind of an algorithm in the background has decided that like this isn't getting the right response rate, so I'm not going to show it any further than that. I think you have to guard against it, basically, consciously guard against it.
What about you, Sean?
Well, I mean, part of it is, because it's so instant on Instagram and TikTok or wherever, it's the algorithm or whatever. I'm going to show them again. I'm not afraid to show the same thing multiple times. And sometimes it bothers me. It's like, I'm doing this again, but
people want to see it, but
it's like,
don't pick it up
right,
the first time.
right, and it kind of sorts itself out. But I think it's more important in general to understand that that you're not making stuff for Instagram. You're making it for yourself. Instagram is a great way to connect with an audience, and for a lot of people, that will be the only way they ever do encounter your work. But really, that's just a venue to connect with people, because and besides, you're making it before Instagram. You're making it before social media. You're making it for all the different reasons that you were making it, and you're going to keep making it whether or not, in America they're talking about trying to ban TikTok again. Right? There's a lot of political talk about that, and it'd be kind of a bummer if it were to go away, but something else will pop up. And so just in general, I try not to. I mean, it's frustrating to see. A lot of times, I try to make them slightly different, but I post almost back to back TikTok and Instagram. And on one, you'll get X number of likes, and on one, you'll get 1/10 of that. And there's no rhyme or reason. And then a month later, that'll be flip flopped.
Makes itself.
Yeah, and you're like, well, I'm just. It has nothing to do with anything, and so I'm just going to keep on.
But if you're an artist, you want people to see your work, so you're drawn to it like a moth to a flame, really, aren't you? To sort of
so I go make my kids look at it.
Yeah, but they don't appreciate it as much as they should, I'm sure.
I think it is very easy to start looking at likes as a way of rating yourself. What I try to do is to observe my own behaviour on social media, and I've got the attention span of a fruit fly, and I like things for completely weird reasons, and and I think, well, I'm no different from anyone else, so I try not to take it. But it's not like people are studying it and thinking, now, do you know what, that's not good enough for my like this time. So I try to keep that in mind. And there are times when it's really quite useful as a kind of rough. If I'm doing something like I'm making greetings cards, then maybe I would look through and see if there are any particular prints that are consistently, people love them, because I know if I'm going to turn them into a greetings card or something, then chances are, if loads of people on social media.
You are reacting to
so that point of view,
in a positive way, really, not in a negative.
I mean, I always feel like the things that concern me are when people take the trouble to write something in a comment, then that becomes much more attention grabbing and much more of an influence on the way that I'm thinking. It wouldn't change what I do, but I would engage with it, because that's somebody who's not just like me at a bus stop scrolling through thinking, oh, I like that blue. That's how I tend to try and look at it.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, just how many things that you'll scroll through that you do in fact like, but you don't necessarily hit on every one of them, and definitely don't comment anywhere near as much as you could if you going to comment on everything that I like. I'm going to give it a real meaty comment.
Okay, so the likes. What happens? I'm sure that none of you have ever experienced this, but what would happen if somebody makes sort of some kind of derogatory comment in your follow, and they put a thing saying, I don't like you or this because of that, this, that, and the other. In theory, how would you respond, or would you just not respond? Would you just sort of go, oh, okay, I better not kind of get involved in a tit for tat, tat for tit fight?
That's happened to me. Right. Yeah, I've had that. I had one on YouTube the other week about, could you stop saying I was like,
yes, I am.
Well, no, I sent them a message saying no. But yeah, I've had negative stuff, and what I try and do is the grown-up thing where you walk away from that comment, and You know, I try not to be too flippant in replying because I know how that kind of mistranslates, and I try and remind myself that they may have a good point. Occasionally, people are dead right, and it would have been better if, or it might have been different if. So I get really, really enraged, and I shout at Ben, and then I cool down.
Stop doing it then.
So he bears the brunt of my whining, but I try not to get too personal.
I get really upset about it. You go around them with the car, smash their windows. Yeah. What about you guys?
I get every once in a while I'll get a comment. Right now, I mean, I don't draw a ton of Star Wars things, for instance, but like, I mean, I'm looking at a lot of stuff from pop culture.
Star Wars fans, they'll be
stormtrooping
your house down.
Yeah, you know, and whatever it is, I mean, I might make something that originates from internally, or I might just be drawing something from, Famous Monsters or whatever. But I'm not alone in doing that. There's millions of people posting all over the art world, all over social media with, their stormtroopers or their Martians or whatever. And somebody will write, "It must be really nice to steal someone else's artwork." And I'm like sitting back in my tub, drinking ice cold Coca-Cola in the middle of the day, not going to my job. And I'm like, yeah, it's really nice. But I'm not stealing any. I mean, like, I didn't invent Star Wars,
you can only be you, can't you?
Right, I tell them, I was like, look, I call myself Sean Starwars, so that should let you know that, like, I'm going to take from whatever I want. Yeah. Like, I wasn't born with that name.
Oh, really?
And so, Julie tells me that my wife tells me that I should let most of those things go and not respond back. But there's that part of you where, like, I'm making art in the first place because I'm responding to something. So, of course, if somebody says something, but I would never go into another person's store, place of business, and say, "How dare you sell this product?" Or like, "Oh, wow, that's just like this thing that came out in '77 or whatever." And so, like, I feel like it's all right to fight that ugliness with some ugliness, but I keep getting counseled that that's not the best approach. And so
it should be quite fun to just sort of
it makes
comedy way to
just let it go,
pick them up and down the high street. And
so that's from now on. That's what I'm going to do. Just ignore it. I can't
go for it. You get loads of interest on media from that. If you arrange, we could do it like a sort of a comedy thing where we arrange to meet each other in the high street and have a fight.
But I mean, but it's funny too though, because I've seen that when I do respond back, and my tendency is to just be a smart ass, but I usually pull it back and just respond, but with a thoughtful answer. And it's nice to see the people that do actually read the comments, including your responses, that then give you that feedback that you did the right thing with the like, so that you know you're a good person.
Because none of us would know that. But I
find on the whole people are pretty nice, but then the occasional negative comment that creeps in, I tend to just completely ignore it and pretend it hasn't happened. I don't delete it, I leave it there, because quite often if somebody is showing up and saying something really mean, it makes them look bad. Like I don't want to make myself I don't want to engage with that. I'm quite happy to leave it. Other people can engage with it if they want to, but I don't try and hide it, but I don't respond to it. I just leave it be.
I'd follow that up with saying, because I do a lot of educational videos and I've done a lot of YouTube tutorials, and I tend to sort of share how to. I think psychologically, I quite often feel when I get a negative comment, it's like, but I'm doing all this and I'm sharing all this and I'm being very generous and you can only be... And then I have to remember that nobody's making me do that, and that it's not necessarily relevant to people. And, I think there's the temptation to sort of feel that you're hard done by because they've made that negative comment. And I do have to remind myself that, Nobody's made me go out there.
And you also have to remember that the internet is full of very bitter, nasty people.
Bitter and twisted people. Yeah.
Occasionally, this sort of bad response you get on social media can be almost funny. In the States, we supply through a chain, amongst others, called Blix, and customers can leave a star rating. And somebody left only 3 out of 5 stars, and they explained they would have left 5 for the product, but it was delivered by UPS to her neighbour because she was out, and the neighbour went away on holiday for 10 days. And I didn't feel we were entirely responsible for that. But we could have responded on behalf of UPS or somebody. But as you say, best to let them go, I think.
You just need to hand deliver all your inks.
Yeah. Occasionally, if it is something very technical, we tend to get people to opt off the main discussion and say, can we message you? Because otherwise it's not of general interest. But yeah.
Cool. Any more from the room? Internet.
There's one more. Do you have any advice on pricing, especially for artists who are just starting out?
Go on then.
Well, I think if you're just starting out, the best advice really is to look around you at other people who are at your level. So let's say you're just starting out and maybe you are thinking of collaborating with your local coffee shop where you're going to have stuff on the wall, or you're doing an open studio, and you've got no idea of price. What I would endeavour to do is to go and visit similar venues or similar events and look at people who are in the kind of pool that you're at and get a kind of just idea of what pricing is like. You also have to factor in, are you looking to make, if you're just starting, then you've got to kind of cover costs and stuff. But it's important to take yourself seriously, because if you price too low, people don't trust the product. And the other big thing is that once you've chosen your price, don't apologise. Don't say, I'm sorry, it's £20. I'm not sure if that's the right price. You say to the customer, well, you've got yourself a good bargain. It's only £20 and it's a beautiful piece of work. In fact, you should have 2 of these. That's much more the attitude.
There'll be 2 bits of your work for £20 each if you happen to buy them.
So I think once you've got your price, it's really important not to apologise or justify that price. Stand by your choice. But I don't know, maybe you guys have got other advice on that.
I usually price kind of on the low end, and everybody tells me that, like all the time. Like all my printmaking friends always tell me that like I'm way too low, and I see what they're saying, but there's something really nice about making that connection, and really that's the biggest part of it. When somebody likes your work enough that they want to take it home and live with it, that's solid gold. I mean, that means so much, and
that's a kick, isn't it? Really,
it is. It's such a thrill.
I'd like to give it to you, but I do need a little bit of money for it, which is great because people want it, to stay in their lives.
So I've just started blaming Julie. I was like, I give it away, but my wife won't let me, and so, but it's when I do make a little more money than I'm used to from a piece, it's still just money, and I still am like, there's not enough work in the world that I'm not going to make more tomorrow. And so it almost doesn't matter. It's nice to not be worried about it, but I'm still going to work. And so I really almost don't care at all. But then, Julie drops the bills down in front of us and says,
What do you say? I'm in the bath having a Coke.
That's right.
Not now.
I'm stealing more art. Leave me alone.
Okay, what do you think?
Similar to Laura, when I first started out, because I came to it as a hobbyist rather than a professional artist, like I'd had no training in any of that kind of stuff. So I was looking around at what people, kind of my peers were doing. I spent a while kind of researching on Etsy, which is quite a good resource because there's so many printmakers there. Getting a sense of what the kind of range of prices for like the size of prints I was producing were. what felt to me like it was at the low end and being sold too cheaply, and then what seemed like it was overpriced and wasn't shifting, and I pitched myself somewhere in the middle. I think I started out priced quite low, which for someone starting out was quite useful because it enabled me to be really accessible. It was very easy to get one of my prints, which I really like, and I still try to maintain that, although I do larger pieces that are priced much more in the art world now. I've still got a lot of very small, accessibly priced prints, and I will always do that. But in terms of like figuring out now where I set the price, I tend to think in terms of the whole edition. So I think, how many of these am I going to make? What is the total that would justify the kind of the work that has gone into this, like the time that's gone into the block, the materials that are involved in the printing. If it's a kind of gallery type edition, I'll be using much more expensive paper. I know that I'm going to burn through loads of it because there'll be all the misprints. There's a calculation there for the kind of the materials cost and the time cost, and even pricing in things like the design process that goes into it. Like that's a whole extra chunk of time that if you were paying yourself an hourly wage, you would want to take account of. And it's not as straightforward as like I have spent this many hours on it, but I do try to make sure that it's a kind of a fair price for the work that I know has gone into it. But then, as I say, like the smaller, quicker blocks, they're priced much lower to maintain that kind of entry point and to make it easy for people to own.
Can I ask how you guys feel about when you look on Etsy and there's somebody who's been to a workshop and they've produced a nice, little liner cut of a very simple, quick liner cut of a sparrow. It goes on to Etsy and they're selling it for £8, and then they produce another 50, and they're kind of like sort of churning these things out, and people buy them because but they like them. These people that sort of are maybe less experienced but have like we all do now, an ability to sort of present ourselves out to the public, and so there's an awful lot more printmakers because of its accessibility, especially with things like liner cutting, because you can do it on your kitchen table and you can make it with a bit of paper, a bit of ink, and a wooden spoon. How do you feel about those guys on the internet that just sort of churn out this stuff but seem to be selling lots of incredibly cheap print? Do you feel like it's sort of I don't know, dumbing down the nature of something? I don't know. I mean, I think
as long as it's what makes me cross is when people produce stuff and they say it's a lino cut and it's not. It's a printed out of a machine looking like a lino cut. That annoys me. But I think there's room for everyone. Really. I think there's a wide enough.
Just big everything up. Just make it all.
I think good luck to them. I mean, I'm always delighted when someone maybe does a class with me and then goes on and sells work from that. I'm always really thrilled when that happens.
They're massively successful.
No, I mean it's great. I think that's room.
I think everyone starts somewhere. You find the price point.
Should they have the right to put their first print online and sell 35,000 of them for
I would.
£1?
If I could.
It's kind of like any other market, where people. Sometimes I talk with my friends about it because, like there's a big printmaking thing going on right now in America, Print Austin. All my friends are there and everyone else is there, and Tom Huck is the relief printmaker I think is the best on the planet, and his stuff is right there. Next, it might be somebody that just started 3 weeks ago, and they might make a nice little bird like you were mentioning or whatever, and somebody comes along and they connect with that bird, and they're not necessarily aware of all of the history and the legacy and all that stuff of Tom Huck or somebody else, but they really like that bird. And it can be frustrating when everybody's liking that bird that somebody made and not your robot or whatever. But it's just how many restaurants are down the street, and like there's a big line here and there's not here, and it's just the way it is sometimes.
Goodwill out.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Good.
Okay. Do you want one off the
sheet, please? Yeah.
Off the sheet. Okay. Oh wow.
What's the timing, Ben?
We're at 12:22.
quick.
There isn't anything actually cutting us off here, so
I think
we can carry on until
these guys are probably exhausted.
I've got one here, which is a sort of techie. Well, not really. What single palette of ink would mix the widest range of colour? So colour palette. If we could just have a moment about colour palettes or choices of colour. Do you want?
I have 5 tubes. I have red, yellow, blue, black, white. I don't buy any of the kind of specific shades. Like I always mix my own shades, and it's the primary school palette that does me.
Yeah, that's pretty good. You know, I mean, it's nice to be able to open up a can of a pre-mixed color, you know, sometimes. But I like what happens when that yellow is printed over top of the blue, and you get that green or orange or whatever. To me, that's something so magical, and it just feels so much more powerful than when you mix ink in. You know, when you just deliberately make that color, even though it's beautiful sometimes. So yeah, I pretty much just use processed colors, even though sometimes fluorescent ink.
I was going to say, do you have fluorescent ink?
I do, but I pretty much just CMYK as much as anything, and you can do anything with it, or almost nothing with it.
Yeah. I mean, I just wish there was a Payne's Grey in.
Until Payne's Grey comes along, I do agree with you. The process set, the term process comes from the fact that it's a process of making a full gamut of colours from just a magenta, a cyan, a yellow and a black. It's also worth, you quite rightly mentioned there, an extender being clear. You can, from using extender with any of these colours, you can get an enormous range. Don't forget that printmaking inks are very strong. They're almost like concentrates, and so you do need, in many situations, look at Laura's beautiful work. You're a great lover of extender, so that you can, simply by extending, you can create an awful lot of colours. Opaque white, if you add that to a colour, you will make it more of a pastel if you do that, but again, it's a really a super edition. And if you want to go onto the Cranfield website, cranfield-colours.co.uk, you'll find there a downloadable PDF showing you how to do colour mixing. That's not using the transparency of the ink, that's the process system, but you can use the same colours to do off-plate mixing to get a whole range of colours, and it's very easy. There are 2 downloads. One is for the scientist in you, which does it by weight, and the other is the dollops method. 3 dollops of magenta and 2 dollops of yellow gives you this. So there we are. As long as the dollops are the same size, you're okay.
But also think about how thick you roll out the ink as well, because that can affect the colour a lot. Yeah. I mean, my work, I used ink that's often thin enough to read a newspaper through when I'm doing my colour mixing, and the colours underneath relate to the colours above and stuff like that. So experiment and run loads of tests with thicknesses of ink as well if you're colour mixing, because that can make a big difference as well. Okay.
Look, a final one off the sheet or not?
We can do. Choose a.
I like the one piece of advice for a beginner. I think that's a good question.
3 words, if you can.
Keep on carving. But really, my advice is just to be free with what you're doing, just to make stuff, and it's not that's what's really nice about printmaking is that you are making multiples, and so it's a joy to be able to give some away or to sell them or any of that. But you can make them in relief. They can be quick, and just get this trial and error stuff kind of out of your system. You know, make your mistakes, learn from it.
Everybody's making mistakes, even really experienced people.
I do.
You just don't see them. They're just better at hiding them.
You know? I tell people.
Yeah.
but just to keep working.
Yeah.
And then also the beautiful thing about social media is that it can be very supportive. And so when you put that stuff out there, you'll be really surprised how people connect with your work and give you that positive feedback that you don't always get in an academic setting, you know. some people get a lot of praise in academia, but some people don't. And it's nice to have somebody supporting what you're doing, and the more you make, the more engagement you're going to get.
Yeah.
I would say don't lose heart if it doesn't work the first time, because it won't work the first time. Every part of the process is its own little learning curve. So kind of composing a design that you're able to carve is a learning curve in itself. The actual technicality of carving the block, and then you're moving on to printing. Like every part of that process can go a little bit wrong, and that's fine. That's how you learn. You have to get it wrong.
There are times when suddenly you sort of learn that technique that somebody else can do so easily. You suddenly learn that, and I've recently started using a print frog, like the fantastic Ian Edwards does there. He prints all his massive prints with the print frog, sort of reduction and a dozen layers. And it's with the Cranfield Inks, it's so easy to use. I thought, well, that's how you do that. And now I've learned that after sort of 20 years. And suddenly you learn something new. It's just a revelation, isn't it? When you suddenly it's easy rather than impossible.
Yeah, so don't give up if something in the process goes wrong. Expect it, and then move on, try again until it works. And also when you're carve away.
Carve into your finger. Yeah, that's right. That's a good one.
I would say don't let the lino dictate what you want to do. You do you, and you decide what you want from the lino, and that might involve running tests and experimenting and fooling about. So I would be very open-minded, and if it occurs to you to try something that you don't think will work, try it anyway. I'm always doing that, and I'll test it out and I'll try it on something that doesn't matter and check and see if it works. And there are a lot of dead ends, but sometimes you find something really exciting that's brilliant. So yeah, just don't think, oh, I'm designing for lino, it has to obey these rules. Just think, what can the lino do for me? That's what I would say.
And my bits of advice would be nothing on terms of art. I'm not brave enough to tell you how to do that. In terms of materials, don't over ink. Don't rush to add additional mediums until you've put a bit of heat in from a palette knife or from the roller. Get yourself an extender so you can get a whole range of tones from these colours here. I'm amazed we've got an hour and a half in and no one said anything about drying. Oil dries slowly. So
let's stay for
there we go. Get yourself some printmaker's wax dryer. That'll speed the drying up, and the wax rises to the surface of the drying ink, and so it'll add a bit of protection there as well.
Sorry, how much?
So 4 or 5% would be fine.
No, I mean when I was very fortunate to use some of your inks on Wednesday night, very late. I brought the prints down wet. They're on the wall, still with the tabs on, and it took only about sort of 3 days to dry. But how much quicker would it be if I put that in? So you would,
actually drying is such a variable feast, because that'll have been dependent on the relative humidity of the studio, and so it's very difficult to give a definite answer. Indeed, the paper will influence drying. So if the conditions are such that drying is going to be slow, then certainly adding some of that makes sense. And then the final thing is cold water. Our ancestors didn't have access to hot water that we have today, and hot water is not great in the studio. If you wash your hands with very hot water, you open the pores of your skin, and the ink that you have will go further in. And so cold water makes sense for your hands. It also makes sense for your implements. Lino is an absorbent substance. Rollers will absorb, and if you're forever using hot water, you're opening those and you're changing the physical nature. And with rollers, a lot of rubbish comes out if you use very hot water. So cold water and liquid soap, both for you and for your print room sundries and equipment, makes sense.
That is absolutely genius. Use cold water. It is brilliant. I mean, who knew? Who knew that? Okay, I think...
Your grandparents did. Your grandfather, he knew.
Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Has everybody said?
I think everybody
has spoken.
Answered that last question, but if you're going to do a roundup, can you do it on camera?
Oh, yes, of course.
With the mic, please. Yeah.
With the mic. Okay, so that concludes the Q&A. I must say that I'd love to give a fantastically huge thanks to Kat Flint, Sean Starwars, Laura Boswell, and Michael Craine from Cranfield Colours, you're calling yourself, yeah, not just Inks, Cranfield Colours.
Yeah, well,
brilliant. And very much to Ben Boswell as well. So thank you. It's been really, really interesting. If you're interested in print and sort of moving yourself forward in sort of printy land, it's been a really fascinating a talk. And thank you very much for putting in loads of effort, indeed. And just a quick plug for the show, really. We've been in Bristol since Friday, and we're here till the 21st. There's 30 excellent Bristol-based printmakers and national printmakers, all lino or sort of woodcut printmakers. It's been fantastically well attended, and it's it's a really kind of got a great buzz and really great fun. Lots of prints, lots of buying to do. Come and see us. I'll be here all the time. Thank you.